Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. The hammer falls on J.P. Morgan. They are to pay a record $1 billion to settle market manipulation charges. Let's explore! Several members of the community shared this with me, a link to this story here, and this comes to us from businessinsider.com, and they are set to pay almost $1 billion to settle these charges from U.S. regulators of spoofing in precious metals and treasury markets from a report that originated from Bloomberg. The payment would resolve investigations by the Justice Department, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Let's get right into it. J.P. Morgan is set to pay this huge amount to settle with U.S. authorities investigating whether the bank manipulated the metals and treasury markets, Bloomberg reported on Wednesday. The sum would set a record for spoofing-related settlements and could be announced as soon as this week, sources familiar with the matter told Bloomberg. The payment would be in line with other market manipulation sanctions, but surpass previous spoofing fines. The payment would resolve investigations by the Justice Department, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, and Securities and Exchange Commission, according to the report. The agencies have been looking into whether traders on J.P. Morgan's metals, futures, and trading desk interfered with the respective markets. Spoofing is a form of market manipulation that typically involves traders making many orders they have no intention of executing, that can mislead market participants to steer prices in a certain direction. Though the underlying act of making several trades isn't illegal, regulators outlawed the strategic use of such trades in 2010 through the Dodd-Frank Act. Other sources told Bloomberg that the settlement wasn't likely to restrict J.P. Morgan's business practices and that the bank would admit wrongdoing. Interesting. In criminal charges against J.P. Morgan filed last year, the Justice Department alleged that employees on the bank's precious metals desk turned the venture into an enterprise that frequently conducted illegal market activity. After charges were brought against Michael Nowak, the former head of the precious metals desk, J.P. Morgan learned of a separate investigation into its treasury desk, Bloomberg reported. So this is definitely some very interesting news here. And, you know, they didn't talk about invoking the RICO statute here. And it doesn't really say about that this settlement, you know, there's not going to be any past other penalties applied to these actual traders. My guess is probably they're fired, maybe. Who knows? Maybe there's some other contingency. But $1 billion to a bank like J.P. Morgan really doesn't seem like all that much when you look at the grand scheme of things. And where will that money go? Would that go to the CFTC? Will it go to the general revenues of the Treasury? You know, and who is the victim here? You know, that's another thing we have to look about too. As you know, my views on manipulation remain consistent because prices are manipulated up with this type of activity as well as down. I reported that with the Deutsche Bank, and so the victims are those who were to sell and take a loss, typically both in SLV and GLD, what have you. But how do you measure that? How do you weigh about what is causing a price to move at a certain particular time or not? That is very difficult to quantify because commodities, by their very nature, and by the way, we have to look at silver and gold as commodities if they're traded in these markets. We understand them as being money, and in the long run, they perform as an asset that is unique because they basically maintain their value through the course of history. And that is measured through the course of history, by the way, long term. But how do you measure the damage for such a thing? Where's this $1 billion going to go? I'd love to find that out. This article doesn't tell us, and my guess is I probably won't be able to get into this Bloomberg article because I'm limited. Yep, you got to have a trial. I hate that. But regardless, it is very interesting indeed to see this story here, and it's another example of the federal government cracking down, and this would probably pay for the investigation and the like that went into this. But I thought this is a very interesting statement here, that that after charges were brought against the former head of the precious metals desk, learned of a separate investigation to its treasury desk. It looks like it's kind of widening there, and how it's going and what's going on with the treasury and the like. But essentially, I'm not sure. It's like they're not really admitting to wrongdoing here. That's what's kind of makes me a little bit confused about this. It's basically that's it. It's settlement. It was done, and one source told Bloomberg that the settlement wasn't likely to restrict J.P. Morgan's business practices. Does that mean they can continue with the spoofing? I don't know. And that the bank would admit wrongdoing. Now, if it's legal business practices, that's one thing. But if they say that the bank would admit wrongdoing, that means they're admitting to the charges there. And this is something that could be very much looked at, regulated. I don't know how they're going to measure this, but a lot of this activity was done in the late 2000s, the first part of the decade, from 2006, 2008, 2010, some of it up to 2016. But what's going on now? Has this basically largely stopped? Is manipulation still going on? I don't know. It's hard to find evidence of it, though, other than stories like this, where there's actually admissions in court that has happened. And most of that is from years gone by, not what's happening now. How is it being monitored? How's it being carried out? And that's where it goes back to my overall, even considering all these things that are going on, I still maintain my position that natural market forces play a much larger role in the grand scheme of things as to what's going on with precious metals prices. Now, if you want to talk about manipulation on a grand scheme, in other words, a conspiracy of manipulation, there one can make the argument, in fact, it's a very valid argument, there's a manipulation on the dollar. That's right, the Federal Reserve and the powers that be, they want to try to prop up the dollar and also devalue it with a targeted rate of 2.5% per year. And the things related to the dollar is something that one could make the case for in that regard. From what they are doing there, that's going to have an effect on precious metals. The dollar strength increases, well, precious metals typically fall. But also a lot of it is sentiment. There's a lot of psychology that you cannot manipulate psychology. And people react, and it's very strong. Emotion is a very powerful factor in the trading markets, which is one other reason why I don't really get into technical analysis. I have great respect for those who can find trend lines and what's been going on, and typically those can be, if you look at those without emotion, yeah, you can pretty much predict where things are going to go, but it's kind of impossible to do it without emotion. And I believe some of what we've been seeing here in the last few days with the precious metal prices is derived on sentiment and emotion. But nonetheless, people can take advantage, people can capitalize on that, and they'll find some ways. We have high-frequency trading. I'm sure that people will do it and try to manipulate the markets is skirting as much ethical and legal boundaries, right on to the edge of them, if not surpassing them, without getting caught. They will do their best. But why will they do it? What is their motivation? Completely selfish motivation. In other words, they want to enrich themselves. They don't really care what gold and silver go, what price they are, as long as they make money off of them, just as with any other commodity out there. And that's always been my argument along. But nonetheless, this $1 billion, it's a big story for sure. It's a settlement. They better pretty much admit the wrongdoing in this report here. But what is $1 billion to JP Morgan? Maybe it's bigger than maybe it's bigger than I'm leading on, but my guess is not that big of a deal. And what about the actual individuals involved? What happened to them? Will they suffer any penalties, fines, or anything like that? Because my thing, just as I mentioned in the last story I reported on manipulation, I believe the punishment that should be for these folks that are involved should be jail time as well as fines that they should pay. It's serious enough that it should be handled, and they should be prosecuted. And I think part of that prosecution should include some jail time. And there you have it. Very interesting indeed. Thanks to the several folks who made me aware of this story. Would like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch this video, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.